welcome, parents and educators literally from across our nation. I am so elated and excited that you all are joining us here for another month of us focusing on adult social and emotional learning. We're going to go ahead and get our visual back up on the screen. They're definitely by way of housekeeping, some of the things that our visual really helps us with that I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to speak to. I know Katie is really helping us in a major way behind the scenes, Katie. So if we can pop that visual back up right before we introduce our guest for today, that will be amazing. Let's go ahead and get that visual back up on the screen if we can, please. Certainly want to just go ahead and get into some of this conversation. There it is. Absolutely. The reason I wanted for us to have an opportunity to have this visual up, and I see as some people are coming into this space that already you all are saying hello to each other. Sister Braggs, one of our champions from Drake Elementary School. Hello, thank you for saying hi as you are entering into this space. That means a lot. You all know how I operate. Anytime when we come to a space like this engagement is always helpful. Jackie, hello. Thank you so much for being here. Seeing a lot of my friends from my Facebook communities and other spaces here. Thank you all. Thank you so much. So again, this is your adult social and emotional learning monthly training, and I am Damian Howard, your adult SEL coach. So elated, so excited for the opportunity to take a jam-packed 60 minutes with you to really help us all to start wrapping our brains around social and emotional learning, not just as something that we get so we can give it to kids, but something that we get, not just to give, but something we get to live. I don't get it just to give, I get it also to live. And this living that I'm talking about is a thriving. It's the ability for us to focus on cultivating, growing our own character, right? So that we can be better positioned to love on our young people that we care for as our kids and or people under our care as educators so much more excellently. And I can tell you all, there's no better person that I can think of beyond our guest here today who's really going to help us, excuse me, to start understanding and further, right, getting into the right mind space that once we get ourselves right, you all, as we continue to work on our own ability to regulate our emotions, to make sure we're in a good mental place, then guess what? That unleashes a power for our kids, right, to be served and loved by us in a way that makes sense and is helpful for them. You hear me saying love so much? That is super intentional. Hey, keep going ahead, you all, and commenting, saying hello as you're coming into this space. Those good vibes and that great energy is just always super helpful. For those of you who are watching live on Facebook, I want to welcome you as well and give you that opportunity to go to the comment section and say hello to the group. It's about to go down. So you all, just by way of letting everybody know how we are afforded this opportunity to be here and have amazing guests, like the person that I'm going to introduce you all to momentarily, we have some amazing sponsors who help us to make this possible. You see all of their logos mentioned right there. Firstly, we have Together Chicago, an organization here in the city of Chicago that is all about helping to decrease violence in our city. They're coming together and talking about education strategies, talking about violence reduction strategies, economic development, and really consistently thinking of how, as an organization, Together Chicago can position itself to support and be a blessing to this city in a major way. And Together Chicago, once more, is one of the sponsors that is affording us an opportunity to have this amazing experience tonight. So we want to shout them out. As well, we have Willow Creek Church. Willow Creek Church, specifically the Chicago campus, has been a partner of mine for a while, and I started to share this vision with them. I see all of you all saying hello, good evening. Some people are saying good afternoon based on where you're checking in from. That is so amazing and so helpful to see that good vibe and that good energy embracing this space. So Willow Creek Chicago, I shared this at the time kind of crazy idea because it was so novel with them. that we wanted to have special guests, literally the best of the best guests from around the nation, to be able to come into this space and help us in this area of character cultivation, but specifically help us to speak to parents so that parents can be invited into some of these conversations that sometimes we go into our school spaces, close the doors, and we don't help parents to conceptualize and get a hold of all of this jargony stuff that we talk about inside of the school spaces. So my job and my task, I believe, is to help that parents can understand the same stuff we talk about in the schools, and then ultimately parents and teachers are on the same page with what it is that we're giving the kids, so that they can be that much more positioned and empowered to win, not only academically, but win in all of life. So the last organization that really helps us to make this possible is Clever Characters, all about social and emotional learning, specifically working to support adults, educators, and parents who want to make social and emotional learning a reality in their environments. Let's go to that next slide really quickly. I want to go ahead and shout some stuff out. Listen, these are all of the champions that we're working with literally from across the nation, who are being trained with social and emotional learning skills and going into you all schools as champions. So look right here, you all, in that right column, right, for your school. And then when you look at the right column and look to the left and see whose name is right there, that is somebody that's intimately working with me on a regular basis to make sure that they're learning what this social and emotional piece is all about. But not only that, they're saying, no, we're going to be local leaders to go and talk to parents and talk to educators and help them to understand that SEL once more isn't something that we're just trying to learn of so we can put it on the kids, but it's something that can be transformative for our lives as well. So I definitely wanted to go and shout out all of the champions. It's too many of you all for me to go ahead and call out all of the names, but I certainly wanted to affirm you all that these are people in your school who's getting trained on the stuff that we're talking about, like the conversation we're having tonight, so that they can support you in this area. So make sure that you all are reaching out to people like Benita, people like Sheena, people like Crystal, because these are your go-to people when it comes to adult social and emotional learning, so that our kids can win, not just academically, but in all of life. And not only so they can win, so that we can develop our character as well. I feel like that was way too long of an introduction, but it is what it is. So let me go ahead, you all, and get into the bio for our amazing guest that we have tonight. So Dr. Lori Desautels, you all, has a passion in engaging students through the application of neuroscience, so things dealing with the brain, and she's going to really help us to take everything that I'm going to say in this bio that might be like, whoa, what is that? What's that all about? She's going to help us, y'all, to put this stuff in M&M bite-sized pieces so that we can take it, chew on it, and have a very tasty and delectable experience by the end of all of this. So again, her passion is engaging students through the application of neuroscience, brain science, as it applies to attachment, regulation, and educator brain state. She teaches students and staff about neuroanatomy, right? How the brain is wired and how that then impacts our body. She integrates mind-brain teaching principles and strategies into her coursework at Butler. Dr. Desautels has conducted brain institutes and workshops throughout the United States, Canada, Costa Rica, Dubai on mind-brain teaching and learning. And by the way, you all, I'm going to talk to Dr. Desautels about this momentarily. In doing some of my research, I certainly slipped up on some of her TED Talks. And I'm just like, whoa, I know what it takes to be a person who positions yourself in such a way whereby you're invited in to give a TED Talk. So I'm just really excited to explore some of that. She's created webinars for educators, clinicians, and administrators, and she's very excited as well to talk to our parent population today, illustrating how students must understand, and also our educators must understand, how the brain is wired so that we can regulate behavior and calm our brain. Calm our brain. We're going to talk about how calming our brain, you all, is a manifestation of self-love. Self-love is our theme for this month. Dr. Desautels has met with hundreds of school districts across the country. equating to more or working with more than 60,000 educators. With much more work to be done, she is not done. That's why she's here tonight. She taught emotionally troubled students in upper elementary grades, worked as a school counselor in Indianapolis, was a private practice counselor, and was the co-owner of Indianapolis Counseling Center. She was also a behavioral consultant for Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis on the adolescent psychiatric unit, where she learned that emotional and mental illness can be so challenging for youth. But here's the but: the brain can repair and heal. Resilience rests at the core of human nature and our well-being. Dr. Desautels, thank you so much for being here tonight. How are you?
I'm very well. Wow, Damien, what a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to share with everyone tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Was there anything that I missed by way of introduction that you would like to share out for our parent and educator population?
Well, you really didn't miss anything, but I mean, I would love to share that I couldn't talk about what I'm going to be speaking about this evening if I weren't back in the classroom. And so I do want to share with everybody that even though I teach undergraduate and graduate students at Butler, 7 years ago, when the state of Indiana took over 4 schools in Indianapolis and 1 school in Gary, I was observing at Arlington High School at the time, and I knew I wasn't walking the walk. I had lost touch with educators. It's not enough to go in and observe teachers. I was a former special ed teacher, and I just absolutely knew I had to get back in the classroom. So everything I'm going to be sharing this evening comes from a course release that the university has given me. And I have been back in every grade level for the past 7 years, twice a week. I'm co-teaching in the classroom on the ground floor. And so none of the practices I'm going to share tonight are out of a lab or they're out of a textbook. They are actually what I am implementing right now in our classrooms and in our schools and districts that really address this operationalizing of social and emotional learning through brain science.
You know, that's so important for you to provide that context for us, because I think a lot of us believe once more that when we're getting something from somebody who wrote a book on a particular topic, that it's going to be so jargony, it's going to be so much theory in it that it's really hard for us to get the tangible principles and apply them in our lives. So once more, that context was super powerful, because what I think that you're starting to do already is to help our parent population and myself to really understand that you are living the life that you're talking about with us here, that you just weren't in your own silo or that office right there writing about this stuff from your own perspective. You're writing about this stuff from your experiences. So I think that's super powerful. Let me ask you a question just to get us started. And I have a bunch of questions off the top of my mind that aren't even the questions that we sent to you. So bear with me here. Mm-hmm. Why is it, from your perspective, that oftentimes there is a struggle for us to translate some of the things that we talk about in the school space to our parent communities and our parent populations?
Well, it's an excellent question, first of all. And we as a society, and again, this is just my perspective, but I think we all tend to work in silos and we don't really do it consciously. But I feel like sometimes we're very protective of the work that we do in our homes, in our schools, in our classrooms. It's even hard sometimes for, teachers. I think it's hard for us sometimes to reach out to one another and to create that connection, because maybe we feel weakened by that, or we feel like we're not enough. But it's a great question, Damien. And, one of the things that I want to share tonight too is that I'm a mom of 3, and now they are 3 adult children. I would have been a very different mom had I known what I know today. So I am speaking this evening from an educator's perspective, but also from a parent perspective, because this work transcends everything. It's about all we do in life. It's about all of our relationships. You don't just learn a skill and implement it, and then you're done, it literally transforms your beingness. It's not about doing, it's about being.
Yeah, so I know you referenced there your adult children, and in one of your TED Talks, it was the most recent one that I can find. You actually read from one of your kids, their what is it, their journal.
Journal.
There was a particular story that you wanted to share from that journal. I really love to ground this work through shared stories. So I would love if you could just kind of revisit why it was important for you to share that story in that space and the point that you were trying to bring home and sharing that.
Mhm. Well, so again, thank you. I want to share tonight that, we all, as families, we experience challenging times, throughout our lives. And at the height of my, teaching career, our oldest son was struggling so much. He was always struggling with anxiety. But when he entered his freshman year in high school, our worlds crumbled. And I was not sure what to do because I saw his behavior change so rapidly that I was scared to death. And we know that anger is the bodyguard of fear. And so I thought I was doing all the right things as a mom. And I was checking and I was texting and I was, giving him curfews and I was present. And yet I could not stop this cascade of these adolescent behaviors that started to happen. And I want to be really honest tonight because, Andrew entered this freshman year in high school, and we saw behaviors change. We saw him drinking. We saw him smoking pot. We saw him using other drugs. And I didn't know what to do. And I have to share this with you tonight. We have two daughters, and we were trying to protect the whole family. But I was sitting in my office at Marian University, and I was waiting to go into my class, and I saw an email come in, and it said in the subject line, Andrew in action. And I thought to myself, do I open this now or do I wait? And as parents, that I opened it immediately. And this is what was read to me, or this is what was written to me. Dear Dr. Desautels, I want you to know that Andrew finished his assignment today. He had a smile on his face, and he was walking around and helping the other students. And then this freshman Spanish teacher wrote to me, please let me know how I may serve you in the days and weeks to come. And I can tell you, Damien, that last sentence changed everything for me as a mom and for an educator, and it changed everything for Andrew because we work for people we like. We respect people who respect us. And this freshman teacher provided a light and a repair and a beginning for our family because we had really lost hope. And so when I share about the journal, Andrew probably is one of the most sensitive human beings I've ever met. And he would write in his journal because that was his touch point. That was his connection. When it didn't feel safe to do it with another person, he would write in his journal. And it was, I believe, such a buffer and a protective factor for him as he went through some of those challenging times. So thank you for asking me. And again, we are human beings. We are living systems, and our brains and bodies are constantly learning and growing and developing until the day we stop breathing.
So it sounded like implicit in you sharing that powerful story that I know in your ability to be vulnerable like that with us and sharing your truth was just an illuminating and even revelatory moment for so many of our parents that were just like, man, my child might not necessarily have the same experiences as Dr. Lori's child, but I can resonate. There's some things that I felt like I didn't know how to work through this situation, right? But I believe even in you sharing your truth and sharing your story, that we're starting to give some parents some hope and some new ways of thinking. Now we're kind of getting into the neuroanatomy and all that stuff, probably, right? About their possibilities of being able to make connection with their children. So that's just very powerful, your willingness. A question I have based on what you shared Centers around, I know, let me talk about my culture and how it was for me coming up, right? For me, and the way that people in my community were raised, it wasn't as much in my household. It's like I'm not trying to get my kids to like me. You know what I mean? They're going to respect me, right? By any means necessary. And we're not going to get into all of the details because those details might get even some of our parents in prison. But by any means necessary, they're going to respect me. And it wasn't as much of us thinking about the necessity of connection. So I'm just very interested in, again, we're navigating around some of the questions, even as we're speaking just very comfortably and organically right now. Just what would be your perspective for anybody that their culture seems in misalignment with this thought that I need to be trying to make connection or relate well with my kids? Just curious.
Well, I mean, I think that we've moved away from listening to our hearts, to our traditions, to the rituals, to the richness of our generations. And and that's just so important. And I guess what I'm saying, Damien, is that one of the things that that I'm kind of learning and relearning and learning and relearning is that it's an art to be introspective and therefore authentic, and to be transparent and to say what you need, to really to be very intentional about how you're feeling in your body, what, because bodies are what, it's not just our brains, it's the body that keeps the score, it's the body that speaks our stories. So culturally, we are a microcosm of that culture, and yet we try to go it alone, and we don't share again that beautiful richness of the traditions and the generations and the experiences that have formed who we are. There is not one right way to do it, and that is so important for parents to hear. It's just critical to hear that you are your child's advocate, and none of us do it perfectly. And I mean, we all make mistakes all day long, every single day, and so you've just got to be gentle with yourself, and you just got to know that we are constantly, as we rupture, we repair, and that's the beauty of the human body and brain.
Absolutely. So I did see that we had a parent panelist who wanted to get in here and ask a question. This is a little bit off script, but hey, we have that flexibility to allow this to happen. We're certainly going to get into the text that connected me to you and allowed me to learn of you. But Joyce, one of our parent participants, go ahead, unmute your mic, and you can go ahead and ask your question live. She said she's new to this Zoom webinar feature, so it's not affording her the opportunity to do that. I'll try one more time here, and then we'll just keep moving if it's not. Oh, go ahead, Joyce.
Okay, I didn't realize I had wanted to ask a question. This is all new to me, I'm sorry, but I'm very intrigued by listening to this. And I'm raising a grandson. He's 15, and raising my children, I never went through these things with all his brain disconnections, full of anxiety and depression and just mood disorder. He's got an onslaught of disabilities, and I really get what you're saying about, like, everything is just always there, and the connections. You really gotta understand and try to feel what they're feeling. I think I'm getting emotional now, but it's so different, nowadays, where you have to worry about so many outside factors. Where when I grew up, there wasn't as much, the bullying and all that. We had some, but the influences it's almost like it can change the chemical in their brain.
Mhm.
And it's just overwhelming.
So Joyce, really quickly, first and foremost, thank you so much. There's just a great level of vulnerability that's being expressed in this space tonight, and I know, and I really value Brene Brown's work in this way. That when we have that ability to be vulnerable and share our truth as a community like this, liberation happens. So I believe even in you opening up right there, that was so valuable for some of our parents in our community. Let us know where you're checking in from.
Massachusetts.
Absolutely. How did you get access to this webinar tonight, just out of curiosity?
I had gotten an email from the school.
Perfect,
The
perfect. Thank you.
his best special ed program.
Perfect, perfect. Dr. Desautels?
Well, Joyce, first of all, thank you. And I want to say something that I wish I had known, again, being a mom when I did, but I'm still parenting. You know, we don't ever stop parenting. Your ability to validate and to listen is healing. When our children come to us and they share, you know, how they're feeling, you know, as hard as it is, what they're sensing, what they're experiencing, for us to be able to listen and to share in their story without judgment is something I wish I had known. That in itself can activate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, and it can lower the heart rate, lower respiration, and lower blood pressure in that child or in that adolescent. So it's not a fix, but we know validating is a touch point. And when we validate one another, we learn to connect through feeling heard and seen and felt.
Wow, wow. So much there, so much richness just in that opportunity for us to have that impromptu moment. We see Dr. Bonner wanting to raise his hand as well. We're going to try, you all, to take all of our additional questions towards the end. There's certainly some things that we want to make sure that we get to. So, Dr. Lori, can you tell us a bit about your newest book that you've penned? From my record, it is Connection Over Compliance. I asked that question over in the chat, and some other people were given another title. So I'm like, did I miss a new text? I need to get to it. Talk to us really about the text, and really, you know, what are kind of some of the major things that you are trying to get to in that particular work. And by the way, again, just us being reminded that we're talking with parents here and really wanting this to be a valuable experience for our parent population.
Well, thank you again for this question. The book is Connections Over Compliance, Rewiring Our Perceptions of Discipline. And this is as much for parents as it is for educators. And so in a nutshell, there are two conditions that I write about in this book that the developing brain and body, and we all need to live well, to parent well, to teach well, to lead well in all aspects. And that is to feel safe and to feel felt, to feel safe and to feel connected. So in this book, I have really opened up what has, it's the research, but looking at how we discipline children in schools and how we discipline as parents in a completely, in a way that doesn't just ask for compliance or obedience, but we are getting a sustainable behavioral change. And so in Connections Over Compliance, we meet our children and adolescents where they are. And what I mean by that is that a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a child. And I want us to really hear that a dysregulated parent cannot regulate and calm their child or their adolescent. What happens is we unintentionally jump into a power struggle and into a conflict. So when my brain state is in fight flight and my child or my student's brain is in fight flight, we collide. And we both activate, our heart's rate go up, our respiration and our blood pressure goes up. This book at its core is about our ability as adults to understand that discipline and behavior management is about me. It's not about kids. And when I can calm my nervous system, and when I can take those deep breaths, and I can go into a conflict and share my calm, that's what changes the emotional, mental, cognitive and physiological aspects. But it's a process and it takes time.
So yeah, so let's start to unpack that, because I know that you've done a lot of work in this area of understanding brain connectivity to behaviors. So from said research and also thinking through what you just shared with us from Connections Over Compliance, how does the brain connect to behaviors, and what is it that you would like to share with us as parents and educators that we should be aware of?
Well, behaviors are signals, first of all. They are communicating something below but that behavior, underneath that behavior. And, behaviors, we tend to look at behaviors as kind of, if one of our children or a student looks defiant or disrespectful or oppositional or shut down, that can trigger something in us. But what we're learning is that children and adolescents who come from significant adversity have a very different brain architecture and a different stress response system, and are living in an escalated hypervigilant fight flight, because our brains are historical organs. They hold all the experiences that we have accumulated. And for many of our children and for many of our adolescents who come into our schools, and again, understanding that adversity happens on a continuum, and I'm not talking just about big traumas. I'm talking about anxiety, chronic, unpredictable, toxic levels of stress. Chronic unpredictability changes our brains, and it wires us so that we are living in a survival brain state, and we are triggered so fast. We could just boom, explode or disrupt or have a meltdown with very little instigation. I mean, really, Damien, we could talk about this for a week. Tonight. It's hard to do this in less than an hour, but we do need to understand that we've got to start moving away from talking about behaviors, and we've got to look at brain and body states. Because when a child is anxious, when they are fearful, when they are angry, then we don't have the cognitive ability to, and we don't function from here. You see, the brain is built from the back to the front and from the inside out. So when I'm rough as a kid, when I'm mad, when I'm anxious, when I'm depressed, there is firing happening in this part of the brain called the limbic system. It's the amygdala. And when the amygdala is firing, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. So this is where we do life, and this is where we do school. And as a mom, when I would get angry, I'd be functioning from my amygdala, and so would my child. So we'd be having this fiery, escalating experience where we could not get to this prefrontal cortex. And right here is where we problem solve. It's where we discern. It's where we emotionally regulate. It's where we have working memory. And it doesn't develop until late 20s or early 30s.
Wait. Time out. Technical foul. If the thinking part of the brain doesn't fully develop or develop until
mid to late 20s, sometimes 30s. I mean, or early 30s, yeah. Or later.
But then we hear that part of what you talk about that talks about neuroplasticity, which means that all of this trauma and the way that it's impacted the brain can be reversed through our ability first to self-regulate and then make connection with kids. But right, if they're just kind of chronologically not at a point that that brain is developed to even self-correct, is there, I know there's not an incongruence there, but help us to navigate that. If that brain isn't fully developed, how do we then have the ability to see this reversal and how the brain has been impacted by trauma?
Well, so it's a great question. It's based on experiences. So think of the brain is an experience dependent organ. It acts like a muscle. And so the more we work out certain areas of the brain, the stronger those areas get. That's neuroplasticity. So if I begin to pause before I say something I'm going to regret, if I have the experience and the modeling from my own parent or from a teacher, if I'm given the space and the experience to create a pause, to have something that calms me. We give our kids regulatory practices, some tools. If I'm given that space and I'm given connection, then this part of the brain that I need begins to develop. And that's neuroplasticity. But if I'm always reacting, if I'm always reacting and reflexive, then this part of the brain, this midbrain region, becomes overreactive. It's almost like we have an amygdala hijack. So what happens is we discipline. See, traditional discipline works the best with the kids who need it the least. And it works the least with the kids who need it the most. Because what we do with traditional discipline is typically the adult is dysregulated. I was. As a mom, I was as a teacher. How many times did I threaten, nag, and yell when I was functioning from my amygdala? And what happens is our kids mirror that. We can unintentionally re-traumatize and reactivate their stress response systems because those stress response systems are developing. And so for many of our children, and this is the coolest part, listen to this. The brain has its greatest time of development in the first about 1,000 days of life. So from utero, even in utero through age 2, our brain is sticky. The experiences that happen to us in the womb and in those first few years of life literally stick to the brain like Velcro. So we may be dealing with it. So you might think, well, what? This kid's got a great life. What's going, but what? This kid's got connection. He's just manipulative. He's just being entitled. I hear this all the time. Well, that's how the behavior looks. But this is what we're talking about. Experiences build brains. And so, and when we see patterned repetitive behaviors that are dysregulated, we've got to say, wait a minute, there's something going on under the hood here, because we're missing a piece of this. And so it takes a calm adult to calm a child. It takes a prefrontal cortex to create another calm prefrontal cortex. And we didn't know this research 10, 15 years ago. This was unknown to us. So I say to families and I say to schools, look at your discipline data, because if your kids are making a shift, then what you're doing is working. But if you see the same kids in the office, you have the same referrals, the same suspensions, the same expulsions, the same old, if it's the same group of kids every week, you've got to look at your data. And connections over compliance, this is about behavior management and discipline, as I said, begins with me, the adult.
So it sounds like you use nomenclature such as traditional behavior management. And even speaking of the traditional way that we go about trying to change behaviors as not the most intuitive and or best way to go about it, especially as neuroscience has developed and illuminated certain things in the last decade. So talk to us a little bit about what your suggested alternative is. What language do you use to talk about it? What does that look like?
Well, I want to be very clear here too, is that, every situation is different. But what the work that I'm doing is I'm working in schools where we're disciplining the same kids who come in with what we call pain-based behaviors. and kids that are exhibiting, chronic anxiety, they've been given, labels, behavior disordered or emotional challenges, or just even kids who are in the office every week. And so what we see that these kids are coming from experiences that have literally contributed to some of the behaviors that we're seeing. So when we think about alternatives, what we understand is that it takes connection. The brain is a social organ. We can't survive without each other. And it takes feeling safe in an environment with, and the resiliency research is incredible. It takes safety to feel safe. So that's personal. What feels safe to me may not feel safe to somebody else. But it also takes that feeling felt, that feeling connected. So what we're doing is we are working with adult brain and body states. When we think about the application of this framework, we're creating touch points for the adults in the building. We're helping the adults to do some reflection, and and just like you introduced this whole program tonight, I wanted to just jump out of my seat and say thank you, because it is about self-care. It's about, are we caring for ourselves? Because emotions are contagious and kids read us perfectly. So you can have a smile on your face, but if your tone is off, and if you're posturing in a way or gesturing in a way that feels unsafe to a child, they're going to escalate. So it really is, we're not negating consequences. As adults, we get so worried about consequences. He can't talk to me that way. This can't happen. What's the consequence? I don't care. This is, hey, come on, I got 10 aces. This kid needs to giddy up, and, so, I mean, I get it. This is how we've done discipline forever. But I'm not talking about all kids. I'm talking about our children and adolescents who are exhibiting chronic behavioral challenges. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's greatly clarifying. I just really want to get to that part in your work whereby you talk about the importance of self-regulation, right? And it really seems like this self-regulation that you speak of is a key for us to position ourselves mentally and even physically in a place to do what it is that you're talking about doing right now, to make those connections, to do that relationship building that could positively impact the children. So I just really want you to be able, if you would do us this privilege to speak to, right, why self-regulation is so important, and even just really explain for our parents here tonight what you mean by self-regulation.
Well, self-regulation is our ability, as a child's ability and adolescent's ability to eventually, it doesn't happen overnight, but to eventually, understand how their choices affect others, and to stop, to pause, to just pause, to be able to, go splash cold water on your face, go shoot some baskets, go move, take some deep breaths, and those are ways where, we can notice when our heart is beating fast. We can notice when we are getting angry. That's self-regulation. When we are aware that our body and brain are changing. And when our 5 and 6-year-olds can know that. But it's like, this is what I want to share with you. If you grow up in an environment and no one's kind to you, you don't develop the circuits in the brain for kindness. If you grow up in an environment where no one is empathetic, no one's putting themselves in your shoes, you come into the world looking entitled. Because those aren't soft skills. Those are brain skills. Those are experience-dependent skills. Self-regulation is another one of those. If everybody in your environment is always overreacting and reflexive and yelling and screaming at each other, or not screaming, but if everyone is always reactive, you become reactive, because that's how the brain has learned. So here, this is how we begin this. We begin to share, and we do this in schools. We know that breath and movement and rhythm and pressure and touch and heat, or a coolness, temperature change, all of these are calming to the nervous system. So in my fourth grade class, and I work in a district here in Indianapolis, and in a school that is, this school has probably, I think, 700 students, first grade through sixth grade. This school is, I think the demographics, they're about 90 to 95% free and reduced lunch. So this is a high poverty school. And our children in this, so the third and the fourth graders that I'm working beside are learning every morning. This is SEL. They are learning about their amygdala. They're learning about their prefrontal cortex. They can tell you neuroplasticity in their yesterday. They know their hippocampus. So we start with, we quit talking about behavior, and they'll say, Dr. Lori, you know what, my amygdala is firing. They'll come in and they'll be all huffy and, my amygdala is firing, and they put their brain above, on, or below the line. And then we begin to introduce to them practices that feel good to them. What feels good to you? Does it feel good to go outside and play, outside? Does it feel good to go swing? Does it feel good to get a glass of water? Do you need something to hold? Would it feel good to wrap a blanket? When you start to feel dysregulated, and what does that feel like in your body? Our kids are given choices of things that feel good to them, just like adults. How many of us get calm by listening to music? How many of us need alone time? How many of us need to be wrapped up in a blanket, or we take a cold shower or a hot shower? Our kids are no different. So we are giving them an opportunity to know when they start feeling in their body that agitation, and then we begin to provide them with some regulatory practices.
Okay, and some of the examples of the regulatory, or so when you say regulatory practices, is that synonymous with calming practices?
Yeah, so we could do one right now. So we know, so breath, our grandparents for generation have been talking to us about deep breathing. When you take 3 deep breaths, it literally activates that parasympathetic nervous system. So what we have kids do is hold up your hand. And this, I'm just going to give you one because I know we're probably running out of time. And we have them move too. We have them trace their lifelines, and they inhale and exhale, and inhale and exhale. We have them breathe in a favorite color and breathe out a worry. We have them breathe and trace their hands. We have them hold their shoulder, and we have them put a hand under their arm. We have them take 3 deep breaths. So, there are so many, we call these focused attention practices, where we use breath, visualization, a taste, a sound. We give them pop rocks. You guys remember pop rocks? They put a little pop rock on their tongue. They focus on the sensation, and then they talk about the sensation, and it brings them right back into the classroom, into the present moment, and we talk about what that feels like, in their body, on their tongue. So again, I'm telling you so much in a short amount of time, but this is discipline on the front end. And these focused attention practices are part of our routines as parents and part of our routines as educators.
So much different from the punitive things, right, that we've been taught to do or that we've experienced. And to your point that you made earlier, that many of us have seen don't change behaviors, and they don't make the positive impact that we're actually searching and looking for. Yet and still, it's all we know, so it's all we do. But I really hear you saying that many of the practices that you're espousing today are actually tied to brain science. These things have the ability to, like you say, tap into what's going on with the firing of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and just how our brain is starting to remember certain things and even, retrace that. Just powerful stuff. We have another panelist who wanted to come in here and ask a question. I think that I raised her up as somebody who is a part of the group. Angela, if you could unmute your mic and then also make sure that your visual is on. I cannot see you at the moment, but if you're prepared to, you can see her?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Angela.
Hi, everybody. My question for Dr. Lori is, do you see that we have more students that are being raised by generational parents? What I mean, like grandparents or great-grandparents, and that they seem to have more problems with coping skills because they have certain abandonment issues.
Yeah.
As you were talking and giving your information, it brought my mind back to conscious discipline, to understanding poverty and things like those books that I've read in the past. And it's just as I'm also a special education teacher, so 21 years, 22 years in, and I see this a lot with our students, that they're being raised by generational parents. So their parents have gone on and started their own lives, but they're living with their grandparents.
Well, you're absolutely right, Angela. And so the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, which I'm sure you're very well aware of, that was conducted in the 90s, changed everything for us in education and really in our communities. And then since that time, there's been hundreds of studies. And what this study shared is that the higher your number of ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, the higher the correlation to your mental, emotional, and physiological health outcomes. And so, you know, children who come into our schools with, and this isn't many, 4 or more adverse childhood experiences are 40 times more likely to have academic and behavioral challenges. So what Angela just shared, abandonment, neglect, experiencing social rejection and humiliation. And let me share, there are probably 20 different adverse childhood experiences, and they're common. We all have them. It's not about this group or that group. They cross all socioeconomic, all racial, all ethnic boundaries. And so, but they affect the developing brain, and the accumulation of these adverse childhood experiences wreak havoc on the brain. So you might be working with a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, and if they are carrying what Michael McKnight and I call pain-based behavior, that emotional age might be about half their chronological age. So Angela, I really appreciate you sharing that, because our kids who come in with adversity, significant adversity, you know, there are attachment issues. And when you are feeling as if you're failing, or you're not living up, or you're not doing good enough, that triggers that old abandonment, you know, that abandonment, that fear of that you can't even name. Because here's what I want to say. These experiences are below the waterline of consciousness. What happens to us in those early years, we don't remember. They're called implicit body memories. And that's why the greatest time of brain development is before we have language. It's in those first 1,000 days or approximately. And then there's generational trauma. We now know that the precursor egg cell and the sperm cell can carry trauma for generations. The germ cell carries that, you know, the cortisol, the adrenaline. So, I mean, and this is Resma Menicum, who is a therapist in Minnesota, who's written My Grandmother's Hands, talks about this intergenerational trauma and how we hold it in the body, because implicit memory is an embodied experience. So, oh my gosh, so much to share. So I just, yeah, I do. I wish we had so much time. I feel like I've just hit here, hit here, hit here, hit here.
Well, what I hope is that, you know, interest has been piqued so that our parents and our educators who are tuning in, either live and or folks who are going to catch this by way of playback in some way, shape, or form, I'm certainly going to share this with you so you can share it with your community, will just have their interest piqued. That's all we're just trying to do, is whet the appetite today, right? What you all heard is that 4th and 5th graders have the ability to use this language. My amygdala is firing off. If they can say that and they can know what that means, guess what, parents? We have no excuses to start, saying, hey, I can't use that language. No, we have no excuses. If our fourth and fifth graders can get it, I'm confident that we can as well, to really start to understand these connections of the brain to our behaviors so we can regulate ourselves to be best positioned to love on our kids. Now, with that, the last question I have for you really centers around our theme for this month, self-love. Right? We talk a lot about self-care. I want to remix that since this is our theme internally for this month, self-love. How do us caring for ourselves as adults and loving ourselves get us to a place whereby we might be better positioned to ultimately be able to have that self-awareness and that self-management that you spoke of earlier? How does self-love relate to, in any way, this conversation that we're having today?
I feel that I feel we are conditioned out of self-love. I'm just going to say what I'm going to say because we're being authentic here. I feel that in our upbringing, many of us are conditioned to put others first. And what I'm going to interject this evening is really understanding that if we cannot experience physical, emotional, mental well-being, we have hardly anything to nothing to give to those around us. But yet we're conditioned to put others first. And it feels selfish. Like some people may be listening and thinking, oh my gosh, this is the week of Thanksgiving and Dr. Lori's saying that. But I want to say tonight that if we don't care for us, if we don't care enough about how we feel, that has collective contagion on all of those around us. And let me say, we are feeling creatures who think. We are not thinking creatures who feel. We are wired to feel and sense our world. And when we feel safe and when we feel connected, then we think clearly, then we learn. The brain has evolved for three purposes. And can I just say this really fast? And then I'll be,
Please,
okay.
please.
Okay. So, and it goes with exactly, if we don't care enough about how we feel, it's not going to be a good outcome for anyone around us. We have a brain for survival, first of all. Survival trumps everything else. And that's because, of protecting and defending. And that relates to the negative bias that, we carry with us because of survival. It's evolutionary. We pay attention to everything in our environment that feels unsafe, threatening, or unfamiliar. And kids living on the edge live in survival. And they can't get to this cognitive place. So survival, we three purposes: survival, emotions, and after we feel and sense safety and connection, cognition. And that's how we've got to meet kids in discipline, because there's no other way. You're just going to be spinning. And those parents who are listening tonight, I was there. We saw the same behaviors over and over again. All I did was escalate in times I didn't get that sustainable behavioral change as a mom and as a teacher.
Unfortunately, we have so many others who are raising their hands, wanting to get in here with questions. My commitment always is to do my best to end as close as possible to that 1 hour mark, really honoring people's time and honoring them for being here. So Dr. Desautels, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and for all of the insight. We have 3 winners, and we've been actually putting in the chat who those winners are. So you all certainly will be getting access to Connections Over Compliance. We want to make sure we get your emails. If you all didn't respond with your emails, you won't get the book. So give us your email so we can make sure that we get those books to you. I just want to really once more just say thank you and express massive gratitude. I also want to give you an opportunity that if beyond purchasing the book, if anybody here wants to get in contact with you, wants to connect with you, how could they best do that?
Well, my children tell me, Mom, you're crazy on social media. It's ridiculous, they say. But so please, I've got a website, revelationsineducation.com. And so, and then I post everything I'm doing on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. My Facebook page is How May I Serve You, on Instagram. So I'm constantly, you know, just posting all the practices that I'm doing in the school. And so I will, can I write it? So can I write it in the chat that can I do it? How may I serve you?
Absolutely. I tried to do my best to write those things there as
So
you
do
were
I
talking.
do it to all panelists and attendees? Is that what I?
Oh, absolutely. Do it all panelists and attendees.
Okay.
So with that, Dr. Desautels is definitely going to write those things in the chat, you all. We are right at about wrapping this up. Dr. Desautels, thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead and put that information in the chat for our guests. Katie, I need you to go ahead, if you will, please, and put up our presentation. If you have access to do that, we're closing on out. All right, so once more, you all, this was another section that was tailor-made for us to take stuff, once more, that's sometimes jargony, that it seems like we can't get access to really help and support us in our parenting, and make that stuff tangible, make that stuff applicable for you to be able to use in your life. I'm seeing all of the thank yous that are in the comment sections, so I know that that conversation was something that really started illuminating new possibilities for connection for some folk. I even saw one of our guests said that this was a very affirming and confirming conversation for her. And that's how it was for me as well, you all. That's the reason why I said, hey, I know exactly, I don't care what our theme is for next month. I know exactly who it is that I want to join us for the month of November. Katie, go to the next slide just really quickly. By way of a reminder for you all, these are the champions that we have working in you all's schools, who's trying to do their best to wrap their brains around the stuff that we talk about on these monthly webinars, and other strategies that can help you to focus on self-awareness, self-management. What is that? That's that self-regulation we were talking about today. How can we make responsible decisions more frequently in our lives? How do we get to a place whereby we can relate to other people better as adults, right? The more we can do this in our own spaces, we can eliminate this dynamic of collective contagion that takes place in a negative way. Y'all know the preacher in me loved that alliteration when I heard it, so I had to write it down. Collective contagion. No, you all, we want to collectively be uplifting. We want to be collectively nurturing. We want to be collectively healing. So these are champions who are getting these nuggets and who are a part of these trainings, who are so positioned and ready to support you all in this way. Once more, you all, let's clap it up and let's give a virtual round of applause for our guest today, Dr. Lori Desautels, for all of the nuggets and the wisdom that she shared with us. We will be back here next month. You all will be getting the link for that. Make sure, you all, that every month we're getting more and more viewership. This conversation is massively important, and I believe that this adult social and emotional learning has the ability to bring the transformation that we are seeking in our schools and for our school system. All right, peace out, everybody. Dr. Desautels, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.